We're ready to go, folks. Thank you, everyone who's joined us this morning to attend this webinar. And we are discussing if wholesale is right for your small business. And of course, the first slide's not going to transition. There we go. It is presented by Maine SBDC, and we also coordinate with the New England Made Giftware and Specialty Show in this series. My name is Chris Cole. I'm a senior business advisor with the SBDC, and I'm joined today by our Southern Maine area director, Peter Harriman, who is all about pricing. I know he's excited to talk to you about that today. This is a 5-part series, so this is the first one. It's kind of introductory. We're going to go through the next few ones, include preparing for wholesale, how to price. Peter's right up in his wheelhouse there. Designing your booth, and one of the ones that I really enjoy is speaking with veteran panelists that have been participating in NEM for years. So that should be a good one as well. The SBDC, we're part of America's SBDC, and this is a national program. We are in every state and every U.S. territory, been around for just about 50 years now, and we're a partner program of the SBA. Most SBDCs are hosted by universities, state and economic development agencies, and also some private organizations. In our case, the state office here is hosted by USM as well as the Southern Maine Advisors. We do have 13 now full-time advisors in Maine, and most of us are former business owners and have business degrees as well. These are some of the areas that we can help you through. So just starting up your business, making those initial plans, getting financing, working on your management and marketing, all the way through franchising, cybersecurity, which is really important these days, exporting, AI, which we're all starting to get used to, that and working with it, scaling up and all the way to exit planning when it comes to your business. What we don't do is we are not attorneys or accountants. So this webinar, along with all of the information that we provide from the SBDC, is really for educational purposes only. We are not a replacement for your legal counsel, or we will not give you tax or accounting advice. So we will direct you to the appropriate folks when it comes to those areas that you need help with in your business. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be on our YouTube channel. You'll receive the slides via email, most likely within a week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We should have plenty of time at the end of our presentation to go through questions and answers. Just a quick agenda. This is really a high-level overview about what wholesale is. When you consider to do it or not to do it, some of the things that you need to know before you jump in, and how to avoid some of those common mistakes that people make when they decide to wholesale. So wholesale versus retail. Well, many people understand retail. Lots of folks start out retailing their items, and that's selling directly to your customer, the person who's going to be the end user. And that's either through, if you have a brick and mortar, or you do pop-ups, or you go to festivals, farmers markets, fairs, sell on a website, or you sell through a third-party platform like Etsy or Shopify. So those are some of the ways that you retail your products. But wholesaling, this is when you're selling your product directly to the retailer, and then they're the ones who's going to sell it to the end consumer. Wholesale is not consignment. These are very different things. Really consignment is kind of a specialized thing. And we're talking about products that typically are higher end, unique. Artwork is a good example of that. I actually have a friend who's a metal sculptor, and he consigns his items to places like Arabicus and Edgecombe Potters. The consignment shop gets a percentage of that sale. Usually it's a high percent as well. And you have to wait until they sell your product before you get paid. This, it can tie up your inventory if it's not in the right location. Also, if the product gets damaged, you need to understand who's responsible for that. So this consigning has to do with a lot of trust, building a good relationship with the consignment shop, and also having some really clear agreements with consigning. So for some folks this works, but again, consigning is not wholesaling. It's a totally different thing. Um, why should you sell wholesale? Well, this does give you an opportunity to expand your market and your customer base. You get to take advantage of their marketing campaigns, whether it's on their website or their printed materials. It also builds your brand awareness, and you're able to tap into some new customers. So like Haven's Chocolates, for example, they're a Portland-based chocolatier. And when they, started out, and I realized they've been around for a long time, but it really wasn't until 20 plus years ago when they took on a second location in Westbrook and started doing mass production of their chocolate that they started to wholesale. And now you can find their chocolates in giftware shops and general stores, places like that, throughout New England. So again, this is a way to build up your brand awareness, and people associate Haven's chocolate with a high quality Maine product. It also provides you, some sense of security, because it does spread out any risk of disruption. If you have a lot of accounts in different regions, then if there's a disruption in Maine, it may not affect, account that you have in Virginia. This also allows for some predictability in your revenue, and scheduling. It makes it easier, for your inventory. So when you're retailing, you might produce a lot of product to go to a show, to retail. And in particular, if you're making a perishable product, such as sauces, which is a business that I used to have, if you don't sell them at that event, then you're holding on to that inventory till hopefully the next event, or if you're lucky enough to have a store, you can sell it in your store. When it comes to wholesaling, you're going to build to whatever their order is. So this allows you to maintain, a more steady inventory. And you can also sell in larger quantities. And because of that, you get to take, really advantage of economies of scale. So when I started out with my sauce business, we would buy glass jars. We would buy them by the case. And as we grew, and we had a distributor in upstate New York that we would sell to, as we started getting bigger, now instead of buying, cases of these bottles, we're buying pallets, which were less expensive. And instead of ordering thousands of labels, we're ordering tens of thousands of labels. Again, when you can increase the size of the order of the materials that you need, it usually means a decrease in price. So again, that's another, advantage to wholesaling. When would you not want to wholesale? So not everybody's ready to wholesale. You might have a product whose price point is too high to wholesale. So, for instance, you might produce a product that's very high quality, and maybe it costs you, $3 to produce, and you retail it for $5 because that may be the highest amount that you can get for that product. But if you want to wholesale it, you also need to make some money. So maybe you might wholesale it at $4. Then the retailer is going to most likely double that price, and it's $8. And that price may be unattainable for what you're producing. So again, if your price is too high, this is an area that you may not want to consider. If you don't have the capacity to fulfill larger orders quickly, and we'll talk about scaling up later on, that's another consideration. If people don't really know about your brand, you might be trying to put something out there amongst a lot of other brands and it's not recognizable yet. So again, you may want to, excuse me, go back and work on promoting your brand more before you make that step to wholesale. If you're somebody that needs to maintain control over your pricing and your position of your product, again, wholesale is not going to be good for you because or right for you because once it leaves your hands, it's really in the hands of that retailer. And then if you have something that is very customized, right? If it takes a long time to produce it. So if you make by hand, like fly fishing poles, for example, and it takes a couple weeks from start to finish of that product, that may not be something that you are able to wholesale. And, before you make the leap, so we're going to go through 5 different areas about what you should know before making that leap. One is knowing who are your customers and what's important to them. Do you know their habits? Why do they buy your product? Where do they buy your product from? And then how big is the market? And these are questions that you've probably answered prior to even starting to retail, but it's really important to get these answers before you wholesale. Are you going to be able to compete in this larger market? Because maybe your competitors locally, you have the advantage and the brand awareness, but on a national level, what are competitors that are producing the same product? What do they charge? What is their differentiation in their product from everybody else? And then where do you fit in that? Why would somebody buy your product instead? And knowing what's happening in your industry. And this comes to doing a little bit of market research. And we have 2 types when it comes to market research. There's primary, and this is gathering data directly, whether it's through surveys or observation, engaging your customers. This is something that you do on a more personal level. And then we have secondary, and this can be done through online searches. Getting industry or trade information is important. Here at the SBDC, we have 2 sources that we use to get marketing analysis and information, and any of the advisors here can help you with that. Also, another good resource is the Portland Public Library. They have an area where they can help you as well with that. And then what's happening in the economy. And this is something that, nobody can really predict what's going to happen in the economy, but what's trending, what people are concerned about. In 2008, when we had the recession, which lasted for, quite a few years, the boating industry really suffered because that was a luxury item and people were not going to buy that. So boat manufacturers really had to scale back at that time. It wasn't the right time for their product. So knowing, is this the right time for your product as well? And then understanding pricing. So this is where I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and he's going to go through the next couple slides about pricing.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And like Chris just said, very first step, know your market, right? Because it then turns into this, understanding how you can price your market. And you really need to know your market to understand the pricing. But pricing is a little complex because it's not as simple as going out and seeing what other people are selling it for, which is what a lot of our clients do, right? Which, hey, guilty, right? But pricing really comes down to understanding 3 aspects at once. So not focusing on just one, but understanding all 3. Right. The first aspect I usually go into, and I go into this in my pricing webinar for NEM, so one of the series that we're going to be doing for New England Made. So the first one is cost basis, right? And that's trying to figure out, okay, what is the minimum price I can sell this for just to cover my costs? And then I think about adding my profit and adding everything else in to make sure that I'm actually happy at what I do, right? Because we don't get into business just to work necessarily. We get into business because we want to pay our bills and we want to make a living. So what price do we need just to do that? And that's a very important number to know, because when you go through your cost basis, that's going to tell you if you're above or below that next step, which is the market basis. And that market basis is, you could call it a competitor analysis. You're basically at that point looking out and saying, okay, I have clients. I understand my clients from step one. These are the different options my clients have out to alleviate a pain, or if they want something for breakfast in the morning, they can get a muffin, they can get a donut, they can, these are all the different options my clients have. And we've already done the cost basis, so I understand where I sit on the range of prices for the different options they have. So no, step two, that market basis is really important to understand where you sit, because if your price is higher than the other options, well, your marketing now needs to reflect maybe more quality, right? Or better quality. If you're lower, then great. You can get more market share because you're on a lower point, or maybe even you can raise your price a little bit to make a little more money, but you need to know where you sit. So you do the cost basis to understand where you're at just to cover your cost. Then you go into the market basis to kind of understand, okay, where do I sit in the general scheme of things? What are my competitors doing? More importantly, what options are my clients going to see when they're looking at a certain product or service? And then throughout this whole process, the third step is market acceptance, which often called branding, right? So when you first start out, you don't have a brand, you don't have a name, no one knows you. So you're educating the market about you. So the cost basis and competitor analysis is really important. But as you're going in from day one, you really got to work on what is my brand? What is my value? And you're not going to get dividends day one. You start seeing the efforts of your branding come out years later, right? Where suddenly cost basis and competitor basis doesn't matter. If your brand is built well and your name is good in the market, you can demand a higher price than what your cost basis or your competitor analysis would say. So think Apple phones. Apple has built a great brand name. People live and die by Apple products, but the phone itself probably costs $400 to $500. So from a cost basis, Apple's making plenty of money on their phones. From a competitor analysis, their phones aren't necessarily the cheapest, right? But they've built that brand, that third column, right? So they've built that brand up where they don't have to, they're not tied to the cost basis, they're not tied to that marketing basis. They've broken free of that. So as we're looking at our business, we want to keep all three of these in mind. We're constantly working on our brand so we can years later break away from this, but we're also looking at the cost basis to make sure we're happy at what we do. And we're looking at our competitor analysis to make sure we understand what that landscape looks like for our clients and understand how we can market them to them so that they choose us, right? And that they're happy about choosing us. Because when we're just doing retail, the pricing was relatively easy, right? You had retailers, you had end consumers, and you're just kind of selling to them. One-off sales, great, right? But when you get into wholesale, all of a sudden it gets a little more complicated, right? When you get into wholesale, you're throwing in suppliers and vendors, you're throwing in wholesale distributors, and now that line is a lot more extended, right? Where you might be on the very far end of that line, the suppliers and vendor side, right? And then you're selling it to a distributor who then sells it to a retailer who then gets it to that end consumer. And all along that series of steps, your price is going to change, right? You're going to sell it for $10. The wholesale distributor is buying it for $10, but they might sell it to the retailer for 20. That retailer is going to buy it for 20, and they might sell it to the end consumer for 30, right? And so part of understanding wholesale and pricing is understanding how that price is going to change, because you need to know, will the end consumer be happy paying the price it's going to end up being? Not the price you're selling at wholesale. It'd be great if they could buy at that price. But the whole point of you selling at wholesale is you're selling it in bulk to someone else who's then going to worry about the one-off sales, right? So you need to understand how that is changing throughout time. So a nice little extra gift is typically, when you're going to NEM, for instance, and you're talking to a potential buyer, typically they're going to look at what's called keystone. They're going to say, okay, how much are you selling it for wholesale? Let's use a $10 example. Keystone means they're going to double it, right? So they're going to think in their heads, the buyer is going to say, oh, I'm going to keystone this. So I'm going to buy it for 10, I'm going to sell it for 20. Right? That's a very typical in the industry, but each industry is a little different. So working with your SBDC advisors, we could try to figure out, is the keystone appropriate or is it less, right? Jewelry tends to be higher. Grocery, food products might be a little lower, right? So there are some differences, but rule of thumb, all else fails, keystone is kind of how we go by things when we're at the conference. Yep.
All right, Pete. Thank you for that. Pete's going to join us in a little bit with more later on. So right now we're going to go into the third thing that you want to consider before you make that leap, and that's scaling up. You might be in need of people, and maybe those people aren't just the production people on the floor, but maybe you need an office manager or a bookkeeper or somebody else to assist you in those administrative tasks. Equipment. If you are somebody who's making ceramic items and you have a small kiln, now you might need to get a larger kiln or a couple kilns to be able to fire and produce those products quickly. The time, are you available? Do you have other commitments that take you away from wholesaling that are taking your time? And if so, you have to figure out how can I make the wholesale work as well as what I've already been doing? Do you have the space, the capacity really here? So you might be, working from your home kitchen and have a limited space. You're maybe making salsa and you want to be able to expand. Maybe you can't afford to rent a commercial kitchen or fit one out. And that's where you may want to consider a co-packer. And we have a couple in Maine and there are some throughout New England. So finding out, is there a source to do this and making these relationships ahead of time is key. Shipping, how are you going to get your products from your location, from where you're manufacturing and producing to those retailers, and knowing what those prices are before and understanding what you need to make that happen, and the cost of shipping as far as the packaging goes as well. And then financing, can be quite a lead up time from production to actually getting payment when you're wholesaling. So, if you get a large order, you may need to have a lot of inventory and a lot of product and still pay people on payroll and pay everybody else. But you might need some money in between to keep you afloat until you actually get paid by the retailer. So these are some considerations on scaling up. All right. And then the fourth area that we're going to discuss is just the ways that we market when we go to wholesale. Trade shows like New England Made, that's a great example. It's a good way to get in front of customers directly. The nice thing about trade shows, excuse me, they really root out anybody that are not buyers. So this is an industry show. They are not going to allow in the general public. These are people are serious. Many of them are the owners of, a little giftware store or multiple locations themselves, or they could be professional buyers for that. So you get to connect with them directly and people can touch your product, see your product, get to know you. Then the next way to do is also contacting stores, getting a hold of the owners and buyers directly. And this is where you kind of become a salesperson yourself. So you want to do some prospecting before you go out and do that. And when I was in a different role in my life, I used to have to sell consumer show space. So I would have to sell to the people that wanted to sell. And to get there, I would, kind of scope out their website, see who that decision maker was in the company, find out a little bit more about that company, and was it going to be a good fit for the show that we were trying to sell them space in. So again, you got to do some homework before you get there, and you need to be persistent on it when it comes to that kind of direct sale. Then there's wholesaling on websites. Fair is a fairly well-known brand website that people do wholesale on, and I have some of my clients on there who have done fairly well with it. And the thing is that they're going to take a percentage of that sale. So you have to consider, when you do your pricing, that has to be consideration as well. There's somebody else that wants to get paid. Also on Fair, if you have existing customers that you wholesale to, there is an area that they can check a box, saying that they are existing customers of yours, which will change how much Fair gets. The percentage is less when it's somebody else. But it can be good because these retailers are buying multiple items, and you get to be seen on a national platform. So again, that's another way to wholesale your products. Distributors and commission-based sales reps or brokers, I put them together because these are peoples or groups that have a list of clients and they know their clients. Their clients are the retailers, and they, should know where your product will fit. And again, they are going to take a percentage of your sale. But if they're good, and because they're getting commission based, right, they're motivated to sell your product, they'll be able to get your products farther out as well. So when you're getting ready to make this leap, marketing for the show in particular, but really for anything, but doing NEM, these are some of the items that you absolutely need. Your product sell sheet or catalog. Now, this promotes your product and it's about telling your story. It's really the visual effects. It's making it appealing to the retailer, giving them a reason why they want to buy your product. The line sheet, this is where you put your details of color and price and logistics. And then your order form. This is where you're going to have the customer's information and shipping details, quantities, etc. You want to be prepared for the show. And there's another webinar that's going to talk about how to prep up to do the trade show before you get there. Building relationships with other businesses. And, I look at this as not only just, is the retailer the right fit for you, which is key, because it's not going to make sense if your product goes somewhere and it just sits on a shelf and doesn't get sold. So, in that relationship, are you persistent? Are you going back to them, doing your follow-ups, which does require some customer management, being able to, keep up on those leads and keep that line of communication going. And then packaging and labeling. This is the fifth area that we're going to talk about. So your packaging should be consistent with your branding, your color, your style, really what the expectation is on your product. Packaging should be durable. And, if you're packaging something that is breakable, you need to make sure that the outer packaging is going to handle that. If you have a food product, certainly packaging is key for spoilage, right? So those seals and having, the right package for your product. Because when a retailer gets it, also when they put it on the shelf, they don't want something that's going to be that fragile. It's going to kind of hold up to the consumer picking it up and looking at it, etc. So that's key. When it comes to labeling, we need UPC codes, and this is really the expectation. Most every shop uses them, and many larger distributors and retailers are going to insist that you get it from the GS1 US registry. There are other places that you can get the UPC code. But this is one that's highly recommended because they do guarantee that there's no duplication, and it is a globally known unique product code for your product. If you're a food producer, nutritional labeling. So yes, people want to know what the ingredients are, but now people are really concerned about their health. So, the carb count, the fat, cholesterol, sodium, things like that. And there are places that you can have your product analyzed for nutritional labeling. And if you say that your product is vegan, gluten-free, organic, make sure that you can back those health claims up either through meeting the standards of those or even having an organization that can certify them before you put it on your label. All right.
A lot of times we have terminology that's just kind of thrown out at us, right? And so there are some terms you're going to want to start becoming familiar with. And I'm going to address just a question in the chat that we had. Like, for instance, a few slides ago, we had a line sheet versus a sell sheet, right? And so if you're new to this, you're like, well, what are they? Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but the line sheet is more of like a business to business. It's showing you the details that you need to make an order, right? So it's going to have the code, the details, and the price, right? Versus a sell sheet is much more emotional, much more marketing. It might have pictures of the product. It'll have a description of the product. Sometimes a sell sheet could be like a product catalog. And you tend to spend a little more money on it. So it's probably on the better paper, a little glossier, a little harder stock. So you could put them together, but sometimes I see people do them separately because it's a lot of money, or you could spend a lot of money on the sell sheet. And if your prices are such that they might be going up or down every year or so, you might not want to do a whole new sell sheet just because your price has changed, right? So oftentimes I'll see, like a nice little marketing sell sheet kind of catalog, and then they put like a price sheet in it, because the price sheet helps with the order form, right? There's a price sheet and an order form in the marketing. And that way you have everything you need. And if prices change, it's not getting a whole new catalog necessarily. It's just changing that sheet out, right? Hopefully that answers it. If it didn't, throw any more comments out there in the chat. Uh, Going on with the slide, I saw a comment come up, but I'll have to read it in a second. Going on with the slide, so another common terminology is minimum order quantity, right? And minimum order quantity, especially for your wholesale, that's where you kind of break out of that thinking of, hey, I have a product, I'm going to sell one to this person and two to this person. No, minimum order quantity when you get into wholesale, the whole point of wholesale is you're not going to get as much money as if you had sold it to that end consumer directly, but you are selling more in bulk, right? So let's say 24 cans fit in a box. Your minimum order quantity might be the box of 24, because then you can easily ship it. You don't have to ship half a box or a partial box, right? So when you're thinking of wholesale, you're going to want to think of, okay, what is a minimum order that really makes sense for my product, either as far as shipping it and making it easier to ship, or what do I think a minimum order quantity would be to make it worthwhile to have this client and maintain this relationship, right? And then other terms, keystone, markup, margin. The next slide, we'll get into markup and margin a little bit. We already touched on keystone, right? These are terms that kind of get thrown out that you want to understand what they mean, because they mean different things, but they're used often, right? Markup and margin we'll get briefly to, and then in my pricing, we talk a lot about it. Net payment terms, very common. So net 15, 30, 60, 90 means that you want payment within 15, 30, 60, 90 days, right? And as a wholesaler, that's your cash flow. So from your standpoint, you want that to be as low as possible. I mean, net one would be great, right? But in reality, when you're dealing with another business, they want the cash, they want that to be as far out as possible. So for you as a wholesaler, you need to know your cash flow well enough to know if Walmart comes and says, hey, I would love to do business, but I can only do net 90 because Walmart's very famous for being able to sell stuff before they actually have to pay for it, right? Well, does that work for you? Can you go 3 months without getting payment for that? I don't know. So you do want to know what those terms are. Now you can sweeten the pot. It's not on here, but you could do like something like 210 net 30, which means you'll get 2% discount if you do it within 10 days. Otherwise, it's due within 30 days, right? So there's things that you can do to kind of try to streamline that cash flow, but the net payment terms are your cash flow. So you want to know what those mean when you agree to them. Lead and turn times, very common question at the trade shows especially is, hey, what is the turn time? How long would it take you to fulfill my order if I placed it? Because a lot of these people that are coming in, they might find your product but be like, I don't really need this till winter. So what's the lead time so I know maybe when to order it? Because maybe I don't want to order it now and just have it sitting in inventory. I'll order it later. So what's your lead time? What's your turn time? What can I expect? Shipping window, same thing. So if I ordered on today, how long before it's going to ship? Important for them to know because that all the people who are buying from you are all trying to figure out how they can get this or when they're going to get this onto their shelves so that they can sell it, right? Case packs, as I said, is kind of the shipping. Um, Return policy, pretty important. How does that work? Do you accept returns? Do you not accept returns? What's your policy? Do you accept returns if it's damaged or defective? Very common. Do you accept it if it's not sold? There's a few things that you want to talk about there, right? Because if they put it on the bottom shelf and it doesn't get sold, what's the parameters? Again, there's a lot of different ways you can go with that, but you want to understand what it is first. Same thing with chargebacks. Returns and chargebacks kind of fall into the same kind of category in my mind. Purchase orders, MSRP, manufacturer's suggested retail price, right? So oftentimes when you're selling it, and you understand the keystone and all the pricing because you went to the pricing, you're going to say, hey, I think you should sell this. My suggestion is you sell this for this price. And what you're signaling to, that buyer is that this is what I'm suggesting other people sell it to, including maybe on my website if they can come to my website and buy it directly, which keys in them. If they want to have a sale on it, they can go under that price if they want, right? But I won't go under that price. Otherwise, why would people buy it from your retail shop if they can just go right to the wholesaler? So you're kind of, there's a lot of relationship management that's going on when you're getting to wholesale. It's not that you don't have any more clients. It's that now your clients are different. Now they're businesses versus the direct end consumer. And then drop shipping, right? Drop shipping's become pretty popular where you're not actually making it. You get another factory that makes it and then ships it out for you, right? So it can be economic to do that as well. Um, as I said, one of the terms that you're going to want to wrap your head around is markup and margin, right? And oftentimes these get confused because they sound very similar. They're actually calculated pretty similarly, but they mean very different things, right? So markup, very briefly, and again, we get into this more in the pricing, but markup is where you're marking up an item from its cost, right? So in this case, there was $100 cost. We did a markup of 25%, so that went to 125. So the $25 is the 25% markup versus margin, different term, where on the same $100 cost with a 25% increase, that's a 20% margin because that $25 is 20% of the total cost now, right? So it takes a little while to wrap your head around on how they're a little different. But in the trade show, when you're talking to a buyer, or even when you're talking to a buyer, period, it doesn't have to be in the trade show. They might say, oh, we need to maintain a 20% margin. Okay, I know what that, I can do the math. I know what that stands for this is how my product is going to be priced further down the road, right? Or, hey, we need to maintain a 25% markup, or it's customary to do a 50% markup or 100% markup or whatever, right? So you need to kind of be able to understand the difference between the two and how to do the math quickly, because that's going to tell you how is my product I'm selling to you for $10, how is that going to end up showing up to the end consumer if I understand who this, what this middle person is doing for a markup or margin. And that's where we can kind of talk about it and be like, well, 25% markup's a little high, or maybe I need to readjust my price because that means the end consumer is going to have a higher price than I would like them to see. Do I have wiggle room? So there's a lot of things that you want to think about. But again, these terms get thrown out, you can get lost a lot. So you do need to spend some time to just kind of think about the terms and say, okay, I understand what I'm talking about, right? Um, the next thing that we want to talk about is just getting into some common mistakes, right? Common mistakes that we see that we should be giving us a little red flag. So one common mistake is that um, you don't understand all your costs. See this all the time, right? You're like, oh my goodness. Oftentimes, how this translate is, Pete, I'm really busy. I seem to be selling a lot, but I'm not making as much as I thought I would. That usually translates when you really look into it. It's, oh, when we were looking at the pricing, we didn't factor in this cost, or maybe this cost has risen because inflation is alive and well. Maybe this cost has risen and our price hasn't reflected that. So now we're not getting as good of a margin. Because remember, we want to make a living at this. So we've got to be very aware of how the price and how the cost is all being effective. Another thing that I often see for people who are transitioning from, small stores and they get into wholesale and maybe they grow a little bit more is when you were small, maybe you discounted your own labor in the cost of things. And now that you're hiring someone to help you do this, that's a cost you hadn't translated into your price in the beginning. So your price doesn't reflect necessarily that labor cost. So you want to understand all your costs, both direct and indirect. You want to make sure that profit margin is high enough so that you do have some wiggle room, right? Because if you have a price and there's an extra cost that you didn't think about, the only thing that's going to come out of is profit margin, right? Because you have to pay your cost, you have to pay your expenses. So you do want to make sure that profit margin isn't just a bare thin margin, because one, you're not going to be happy with the amount of money you make, and two, you want to have some of that wiggle room just to make sure that you didn't capture everything. Now, again, you understand your market to make sure it's not too high, but that's welcome to being a business owner, right? And then again, understanding what keystone markup and margin are. Markup and margin especially, I see people get it confused when they're talking. And it's okay to say, hold on, make sure I understand. So if it's 100% with $100 with a 25% markup, you're going to sell for 125, right? You can just kind of do that. It's okay. You don't want to, play the fake it till you make it game. So if you don't understand, certainly stop and make sure you do understand, but you do want to start putting some time and effort into understanding what these terms mean so that you can use them or work with them as you're going. Uh, some other common mistakes, don't make it hard to buy, right? If you make it too complex or too hard to buy, guess what? They won't. So you want to make it easy for them to buy, right? And so some common mistakes I see that kind of make it an impediment for people to buy from you is you put your minimums too high, right? Again, you don't want to be too low, so you want to put some thought into this because you're not doing retail, you're selling in quantity. That's the whole point of getting into wholesale is you want one client who does what 20 other clients would have done. So you do want a minimum quantity that makes sense, but you don't want it so high that no one's going to buy it, right? You don't want your lead times to be really long. So like Chris said, if it takes you 2 weeks to make a fly fishing pole and someone orders 20 of them, right? That's a long lead time for them to get those 20. So you want to make sure if you're going to get into wholesale, you can be scalable and that you understand when someone orders 20, what does that mean? What does that translate into for what a lead time would be? If your lead time's really, really long, it might be time to either relook at things as far as scaling and how you can scale up, or should you be, selling? A cumbersome ordering process, right? Sometimes we get into our own heads and we make it really fancy and we're like, this makes perfect sense. And then you look at it, you take a step back and it's like, oh my God, this is a mess, right? So, you can look online at sample template ordering forms and see what they're like. They're pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? So go through it yourself as if you're the buyer. Is this a cumbersome order form? It should be pretty straightforward. It has all the details you need, but no real extra. That's why remember, there's a line sheet. Line sheet's pretty straightforward. Order form's pretty straightforward. If you want to have promotional stuff, save that for the sell sheet, right? And then again, offering too many options or products, right? It sounds weird, but I know a lot of people who are in retail, and when they go to wholesale, rather than offering their entire product base for wholesale, they look at their best sellers usually, right? And they say, okay, like with Chris, I have all these sauces I make, but people really like my barbecue sauce. So maybe I'm just going to wholesale my barbecue sauce to start with, right? And see how that goes and not offer all 26 sauces I have. And then you can do the barbecue sauce. You can focus on that and get that going, and then you can expand after that if you want. But if you offer all of them at once, sometimes it gets clouded. So how this translates into the show, often you might have products out. Let's say you have 10, 20 products out. Oftentimes there's a portion where you say, this is my best seller, or this is the best product, or this is the one that sells the most, right? And you have that kind of highlighted. So that way you're taking a consumer that is overloaded maybe at once, and you're directing them to, okay, this is the one that is my lead seller, right? So some psychology there.
Great. And then other mistakes include, you're the wrong fit with a retailer. So really, does this retailer, is their customer your customer? And you want to make sure that it's your target market that they're working with. Is there synergy between your brands? Maybe you make some specialty candles. Selling them, to a gas station may not be symmetry with your brand. Are their terms acceptable to you? So like when Pete was talking about, the net 10, 15, 30, and these big ones wanting net 90, right? Is that going to be acceptable to you? Does that make sense? Are they willing to negotiate terms? When I did have my sauce business, we sold to a lot of giftware places, and giftware, they keystone. But when it comes to food, and in particular in that time, many of us in the industry, and we actually used to have a Maine Food Producers Association that I was part of, we would ask the retailer to do their markup, go 1.5 times the price that we were wholesaling it to, instead of doubling that price, because we knew that our, customers weren't going to accept that doubled price and still be able to move the product. And then are their expectations reasonable? And maybe they have other folks that they work with, and they expect to get products within 3 days of ordering it from you, instead of the 7 days that you might require. So again, really that communication and knowing these things. Not having a customer management system. And it's true in business. It is the least expensive customer to have is the one that, or to get is the one that you already have. So keeping your customers is really important. And, they get hit, these retailers, all the time with people like us, like you, that want to wholesale their product to them. So you need to be front of mind with them on a regular basis. So keeping track of those leads, your current customers in particular, past customers who haven't ordered from you, setting up a system where you follow up. And excuse me, there are these customer management systems which will have a funneling system that sends out emails and reminders, keeping a calendar. many times you're working with, and in particular, if you're planning on doing New England made, you're working with a lot of seasonal businesses. And that's part of the reason why this show takes place in March, because it's ahead of their season. So knowing that come, February, March, April, that you really want to get out there and contact these customers that may be seasonal to get remind them of your product and get your sales done. Being persistent and helpful is really important when it comes to that. And, understanding that these people are business owners as well. Everybody has deadlines to meet. So this, having some type of system will help you be consistent in your business. Also, letting mistakes stop you. There's going to come a point, right, that you have done your research, you've educated yourself, you understand, you've gone to Pete's pricing webinar, you get the difference between margin and markup, you understand keystoning, you have everything ready, your materials and all of that. That's how you can minimize your mistakes, right? It's no one ever starts out and is perfect. And, I was in what was then the Maine Products Trade Show long before it was New England Made, same show, but different name. And I can remember, my first couple times out, my first year in particular, definitely making mistakes. I overpromised on product. And I learned from that. So it's not perfect, but don't let those mistakes stop you from doing it. And certainly working with an SBDC advisor, we can help you feel like you are ready to do that. And then I just wanted to touch upon some really well-known Maine brands. Stonewall Kitchen, they're a great story. And I actually knew these guys when they started out. And, they took their, excuse me, I think it was their grandmother's blueberry jam recipe, and they turned it into a whole product line and an entire brand. And their growth has been tremendous. And now they sell to 42 different countries. And they also carry other products besides Stonewall, but excuse me, Stonewall is such a well-known brand, that people throughout the country know Stonewall, and it's known for its quality and for being made in Maine. Sea bags is another great story. This woman started out really as a hobby, but she was also trying to be environmentally friendly, figuring out a way to keep these sales out of, the trash. And, she came up with some great designs for these sea bags, and then eventually added some key people that helped this company grow from one retail location to multiple retail locations. And it's now in 15 plus states, and it also wholesales to other giftware stores. Tom's of Maine. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't know Tom's of Maine. It's been around since the 1970s. And, you talk about success and persistency. But when they started out, people really, they were not ready to leave their Crest or AIM or other toothpaste, national toothpaste brands. Tom's made a name for itself really by being a product that didn't have all these other unnecessary ingredients in it, and still had great results. And they continue like that. Tom's logo has been the same ever since it started. And they continue to grow their company. And they grew it so much that in '06, they sold it for $100 million. Not a bad story for a small Maine company. And then some more local brands that we have. Bixby Chocolates. This started by a mother and daughter team, and they've won quite a few awards. And they also work with other food producers that use their chocolate in there, and they really are getting brand awareness for how they make their chocolates. And they're made in Rockland. Rugged Seas is a newer product, although it started in 2012, and really Taylor started making hoodies for fishermen. And this kind of all changed, and the direction of his company changed when his wife jumped in as well, and they decided to upcycle waders, the fishermen's waders, and they started making them into bags and backpacks. They now wholesale their products from Maine all the way to Florida. Coffee by Design, if you're in the Portland area, many of us know that. It's a great story. They started out in one location on Congress Street. And this is really in 1994, we were having a little recession then as well. And it's hard to imagine now, but Congress Street was pretty desolate back then. There was a 40% vacancy rate. And they came on the scene, and not only did they make really good coffee in their shop, but what they decided to do was to become the roasters. And when they did that, they then made the decision to wholesale to restaurants and stores. And also, one of their competitive advantages is they would make a roast specifically for you, for your store, for your restaurant that could be named that. And this provided tremendous growth for them as well. So these are just some of the stories, of Maine, and there are many, many other brands that we could talk about and how they have grown from, very small to fairly large operations. So your next steps, you want to attend the rest of the webinar series. There's lots of good information coming up. As I said in the beginning, this was more of an overview. I think the next in the series goes into different areas and very specific details. If you don't already have an SBDC advisor, please reach out to us. I know lots of times in this series that are people from other states. So if you're not from Maine attending this webinar, there's an SBDC in your state, reach out to them, get an advisor to help you. And if you're not ready to attend the trade show yet, you can reach out to them and say that you're interested to be a future exhibitor, and they'll be able to get you in as a guest. So those are important next steps. And here are multiple ways that you can contact and connect with us. Excuse me. And the biggest one is requesting advising. If you don't already have an advisor, we are here for you. And at this juncture, I'm going to go ahead and stop share, and we will go to any questions that people have. I see there are some in the chat. I don't know if you fielded those, Pete, but
I have it. There's one that was about with wholesale, they were struggling with ensuring that whoever they sold to holds to the shelf life guidelines. So I'm assuming that's a perishable product that has a shelf life. Did you encounter that at all, Chris?
okay. Let's see. One thing I struggle with is wholesale ensuring that whoever I sell to holds, okay, so the shelf life guidelines. So if the products that you're selling, it's not stamped, it should be stamped with like an expiration date. Or is it something else that has specific guidelines? Sarah, if you don't mind unmuting, just a little more detail on that.
Yeah, so I do stamp them with a date,
Okay.
but I have some people just to make sure that they're getting, what they paid, getting their money back. They sometimes hold it longer than the date, or they will put it in. I sell baked goods,
Okay.
and or sometimes they'll put it in a refrigerator to kind of make it last longer, which then decreases the quality of the product. And it's like my name, my logo, all of that on there. So like I'm just struggling with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to work for somebody who made Lebanese food, and they made like hummus and tabbouleh and jadra, things like that. And I actually, one of my jobs was not only to make, but I would go, we supplied the local Hannafords, and my job was to go and check like all the dates and take out, what wasn't, being used because, very similar to baked goods. I mean, with no preservatives, they really didn't have a long shelf life. But, truly, I think that's a discussion to have with the retailer that you're working with about that, and making sure that those get sold. So I've had multiple hats, right? But I had a restaurant and I used to, it was a cafe and bakery, and I actually used to wholesale to all the Coffee by Designs this is when they had 5 locations. And our agreement was that once they got the product, it was their product. And they would only have signs out that said, made by Stones and all the other different places. But the understanding was that, like these products only had like 2 days, and if they weren't sold within 2 days, that they had to, either dispose of them or give them to their staff, whatever, or give them to, like Preble Street Resource Center Soup Kitchen or something like that. I never had a problem with that. And I think it's really having those conversations is important, especially for your product. Like you said, it's got your name on it. And you want to extend your reach, right? I also used to wholesale too. There was then the 1912 Cafe in LL Bean. And it was great for me because my little place was out in North Yarmouth. Nobody even knew. A lot of people didn't even know there was a North Yarmouth. They just think of Yarmouth. But anyways, it was great for me because people would, see my sign and, I got a lot of marketing value out of that, which actually drove people out to my place, which is great. But again, we had an understanding of how the product was. So really controlling those, and if they're not adhering to it, then you probably need to pull your product because they're probably not a retailer that you want to work with. I hope that's helpful.
And a last ditch effort you could do as well is include an additional sheet when you pack it about specific instructions on, do not do this, adhere to this or whatever. I had one client who wasn't selling very well in a store, and they're like, my clients come here, I know that it should be selling better. And it was that he needed to educate the staff on how to sell the particular product, right? And once they understood how to do it, everything kind of picked up and went fine, but they just didn't really understand. So you could try that for a last ditch effort. But yes, like Chris said, if it's a retailer that's just kind of ignoring your instructions and doing what they want, that's your brand. And that, as I said, that's one of the pricing things that you want to work on as you grow so that you can get out of that cost basis, competitor analysis kind of trap that you're in for a while.
And Sarah, I mean, is it just like one or two, or is it like all the retailers you're working with that you're struggling with?
No, it's really just been one. All my
Yeah,
other people have been really good, and I've been able to talk to them about, hey, like before I even put my product in their establishment, I'm like my shelf life is very short, and I date it, and I really like my business is based on quality, like
sure.
quality of products. So I really need you to like follow the shelf life. But some people are afraid of spending the money up front wholesale.
Sure.
And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is like, sometimes it just means that they want to, have a smaller quantity of your product, right? And I don't know what your terms are, how often. I mean, I used to deliver three days a week to the Coffee by Designs in my accounts. That way I was able to also keep track of, whether it was me or one of my employees could see what was happening. If they still had our product on the shelf, I would ask them to remove it when I was there. But if this person's not a good fit, then it's not going to be good. It will only dilute your brand. So
Right.
whatever money you're getting from them is actually not a benefit to you.
Right. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I did see one that I wanted to make sure that I got to here. Let's see, that is what are the next steps needed to get products tested for shelf life, right? There are labs that will do shelf life testing. And UMO actually still does some testing depending on what the product is. I can send you some separate information on that. I think if you want to either the best way actually is to just go ahead and email me. And I'll send you a list of labs that you can use because sometimes UMO doesn't have the capacity. They can be way backed up. All right.
Uh,
Yeah, and I see that John put a plug in for his, which is great, how to prepare for wholesale. But that's awesome because, I see somebody's looking at like had asked about the, customer management systems, and maybe John can put that in his webinar. And also if people want to, email us and see, if we have a list, because there are a lot of different ones that you can use. So, hey, there's John.
Yeah, I'm excited to hopefully see some or most of you guys in a few weeks. So like I said, send me some questions. If I can squeeze in some stuff on CRM, I will. Otherwise, I think that's probably a big enough topic we can do a full webinar on itself. But Chris, you did great. Thanks as always for sharing all of your experiences with us.
And Pete on the pricing.
And
So,
Pete,
Yeah.
yes,
right,
and
but
Pete, yeah.
I do see there are still some clients, and I know people have to jump off. So I really do appreciate everybody attending this. It is a really good series. It does help you prepare for the show, or even just a wholesale, even if you're not going to do the show. But again, if you want to talk to an SBDC advisor, if you're not already, please register with us, and any one of us can help you get ready for wholesale. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm gonna go because I have another appointment, but I appreciate you being here. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, everyone.